On October 11, 2025, the world lost a woman who taught us how to laugh at ourselves, how to dress like nobody's business, and how to live fiercely on our own terms. Diane Keaton, Oscar winner, style icon, and one of Hollywood's most singular talents, took her final breath at 79 years old. The news came quietly, the way she might have preferred, from her Brentwood home on a Saturday morning when the light was still soft and the world hadn't yet woken to the loss. And in the days that followed, as tributes poured in and the cameras turned toward her legacy, one detail began to surface that stopped everyone in their tracks: the fortune she left behind. Not just its size, an estimated $100 million, but what it represented. Because this wasn't money earned from playing it safe. This was wealth built from reinvention, from risk, from buying broken down houses and making them beautiful again, from saying yes to roles that terrified her, from adopting children in her 50s when the world told her she'd missed her chance, from never marrying and never apologizing for it. The fortune made her family cry, yes, but not because of greed or inheritance fights or any of the ugly things that sometimes follow death. They cried because every dollar, every property, every restored Spanish colonial revival told the story of a woman who refused to be contained, who found beauty in ruins, who turned loneliness into art. This isn't just about money, it's about the weight attached to it, the choices, the sacrifices, the quiet revolutions that no one saw coming. If you've ever felt like you didn't quite fit the mold, you knew Diane Keaton. She made a career out of being the odd one out, the woman in the men's tie and the oversized hat, the one who stammered and second-guessed and still somehow stole every scene. But long before she became that icon, she was just Diane Hall, a girl born in January 1946 in Los Angeles, though her family had nothing to do with the glittering industry just miles away. Her father, John Hall, was a civil engineer and real estate broker, steady and practical. Her mother, Dorothy, was a homemaker and amateur photographer who saw the world through a lens, always looking for the frame within the frame. Diane was the eldest of 4 children, and even then, there was something restless in her, something that didn't sit still. She wasn't the prettiest girl in the room. She wasn't the most confident. But she had a voice, literally and figuratively, and she wanted desperately to be heard. In Santa Ana, where she grew up, she threw herself into school musicals and theater productions. She played Blanche Dubois in A Streetcar Named Desire in high school, and even then, you could see it. The way she inhabited characters who were fragile, who were searching, who were trying to hold themselves together in a world that kept pulling them apart. She thought she'd be a singer. That was the dream. Not movies. Not fame. Just to sing, to stand on a stage and let her voice carry. But voices, she would learn, come in many forms, and sometimes the truest thing you can say isn't sung at all. It's lived. After a single year of college, Diane made a choice that would define everything that followed. She dropped out and moved to Manhattan. 22 years old, barely an adult, she packed her life into suitcases and traded California sun for the grit and grime of New York City in the late 60s. She enrolled at the neighborhood playhouse, studying acting under teachers who saw something in her, a spark maybe, or a stubbornness that refused to dim. But there was a problem. Actors Equity already had a Diane Hall on their roster, so she did what every young artist does when the world tells them they're not allowed to be who they are. She reinvented herself. She took her mother's maiden name, Keaton, and made it her own. It was a small act, a practical one, but it was also a signal. This is who I am now. This is the name I'll make matter. Her first big break came on Broadway in 1968 when she was cast as the understudy for Sheila in the original production of Hair. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't even a starring role, but it was a start. And then the following year, she landed a part in Woody Allen's play Play It Again, Sam, and everything changed. Allen saw something in her that no one else had quite named yet. He saw the vulnerability beneath the humor, the intelligence beneath the stammering, the way she could make you laugh and break your heart in the same breath. They began dating. They became collaborators, and for a while they were inseparable, 2 artists feeding off each other's rhythms. But the cost of being seen is that you're no longer invisible. And Diane was about to learn that the spotlight doesn't just illuminate, it burns. The breakthrough came in 1972 when Francis Ford Coppola cast her as Kay Adams in The Godfather. It wasn't an obvious choice. Kay was supposed to be the moral center of the film, the woman who represented everything Michael Corleone was leaving behind. She needed to be vanilla, they said, straightforward, a contrast to the darkness. But Coppola saw deeper. Years later, when Keaton herself asked him why he'd chosen her, he said, "I chose you because although you were to play the more straight vanilla wife, there was something more about you, deeper, funnier, and very interesting." I was right. She didn't just play Kay. She made Kay matter. She gave her weight. And in the process, she proved she could do more than comedy. She could hold the screen opposite Al Pacino. She could be the stillness in a storm of violence. She dated Pacino during the filming of The Godfather Part 2, and for a time, their relationship was as intense as anything on screen. But relationships forged in the heat of creation rarely survive the cold light of real life. They parted ways. The film wrapped, and Diane moved on, carrying the lessons of love and loss into the next chapter. Because if there's one thing she understood, it was this: you don't wait for permission to move forward, you just go. But here's where it gets complicated. Because even as Keaton's career began to soar, the industry kept trying to box her in. She was the quirky sidekick, the neurotic girlfriend, the woman who made men look better by comparison. And every time she took a role, she faced the same question: are you sure you can do this? Directors doubted her range. Studios doubted her appeal. Critics dismissed her as a one-note actress writing Woody Allen's coattails. She could have played it safe. She could have stuck to the roles that came easy. But Diane Keaton didn't know how to do safe. So in 1977, when Allen wrote Annie Hall, a role inspired by her, named after her, Diane's nickname was Annie and her last name before Keaton was Hall, she didn't just perform it, she embodied it. Annie Hall was awkward and brilliant and searching, a woman who wore men's clothes because they felt more like herself, who talked too much and thought too hard and loved too deeply, and audiences saw themselves in her. The film became a cultural phenomenon. Keaton won the Oscar for Best Actress. She became a style icon overnight. The ties, the vests, the hats, all of it. But what most people didn't see was the toll it took to stand on that stage and accept that statue. Because with success came scrutiny, with visibility came vulnerability, and the world had opinions about who Diane Keaton should be, how she should dress, who she should love, when she should settle down. She ignored all of it, and that, more than anything, was the risk that changed everything. By the time the 80s rolled around, Diane Keaton had proven herself as a dramatic actress in Warren Beatty's Reds, earning another Oscar nomination. She'd worked with some of the greatest directors of her generation. She'd built a body of work that most actors could only dream of. But she wasn't satisfied, because she'd discovered something else, something that had nothing to do with scripts or cameras. She loved houses, not just living in them, transforming them. She'd walk through neighborhoods in Los Angeles and see a crumbling Spanish colonial with peeling paint and sagging beams, and where everyone else saw a teardown, she saw potential. She saw history. She saw a story that deserved to be told. So she started buying properties, run-down estates, architectural gems that time had forgotten, and she poured herself into them, hired the right craftsmen, sourced vintage tiles, studied the work of architects like Wallace Neff and Lloyd Wright. She wasn't flipping houses for a quick buck. She was restoring them, bringing them back to life, honoring what they'd been while making them livable for what they could become. And in the process, she made a fortune. Her Laguna Beach property, purchased for $7.5 million in 2004, sold for $12.75 million just 2 years later. A Pacific Palisades home bought for $5.6 million in 2012 fetched $6.9 million in 2016. A Tucson property acquired for $1.5 million in 2018 sold for $2.6 million in 2020. And her crown jewel, her Brentwood estate, purchased in 2009 for $4.7 million, was listed in March 2025 for $28.9 million. Madonna once bought one of her restored Los Angeles mansions for $6.5 million. Architectural Digest featured her work, and Diane, who'd never married, who'd built her life on her own terms, had built an empire on her own terms too. But here's the pivot. This wasn't just wealth. This was weight, because every property required staff to maintain it. Every renovation came with risk. What if the market crashed? What if the permits didn't come through? What if she'd misjudged the value? And every dollar represented a choice to keep working, to keep creating, to keep proving that she could do more than act. She carried the burden of being both artist and entrepreneur, and the toll was invisible to everyone but her. The private cost of living a public life is something we rarely talk about. We see the red carpets and the awards and the magazine covers, but we don't see the quiet moments in between. Diane Keaton never married, and people asked her about it endlessly. Why not? Didn't she want companionship? Wasn't she lonely? And she'd answer with humor and deflection, saying things like, "I don't think I'd be a good wife. I think it would be hard for a man to live with me." But the truth was more complicated. She'd loved deeply Woody Allen, Warren Beatty, Al Pacino. But those relationships had burned bright and fast, fueled by creativity and intensity, and the kind of connection that doesn't always survive the mundane realities of daily life. She'd chosen her work over settling down. She'd chosen independence over compromise. And there were nights, surely, when that choice felt heavy, when the house was too quiet, when success felt like a poor substitute for intimacy. But she didn't wallow. Instead, in her 50s, she did something that shocked her friends and family. She adopted 2 children. First a daughter, Dexter, and then a son, Duke. She became a mother at an age when most people are becoming grandparents, and she threw herself into it with the same fierce commitment she brought to everything else. "The shocking thing is that I worry differently now," she told Life magazine in 2005. "Before kids, if I worried, it was only about myself. But that's all you do is worry as a parent. It's rule number 1 in parenting. Secretly worry without letting the kids know you're worried." Motherhood changed her. It gave her a purpose beyond herself. But it also meant more weight, more people depending on her, more futures riding on the choices she made. She had anchors in her life, people who steadied her when the world spun too fast. Her mother, Dorothy, who taught her to see beauty in ordinary things. Her brother, Randy, who struggled with mental illness and alcohol, and whom she loved fiercely even when she couldn't save him. When I look back on Randy, I just think, wow, I wish I could have been a better sister, she told ABC News in 2020. That regret stayed with her, a quiet ache that never fully healed. And there were fractures too. Her relationships with some of her former collaborators grew complicated over time. The industry changed, the roles for women over 50 dried up, and Diane, who'd once been a box office draw, found herself fighting for parts. But she kept working. She did Something's Gotta Give with Jack Nicholson and earned yet another Oscar nomination at 57. She anchored The First Wives Club and Father of the Bride and Book Club, films that proved older women could still be funny, still be desirable, still be the center of the story. And all the while, she kept restoring houses, kept writing books, kept photographing the world through her mother's lens. She refused to stop. Because stopping, for Diane Keaton, would have been the same as disappearing, and she'd worked too hard to be seen to let that happen now. Now, if you're wondering what a legacy like that looks like in practical terms, here's the second pass at the fortune. At the time of her death, Diane Keaton's estate was valued at an estimated $100 million. That wealth came from decades of film royalties. Annie Hall alone continues to generate revenue, streaming on platforms and playing in retrospectives worldwide. There were residuals from the Godfather trilogy, one of the highest-grossing film franchises in history. There were profits from her directorial work, her production credits, her best-selling books like The House That Pinterest Built. There were speaking fees. She commanded between $150,000 and $299,000 per appearance at high-profile events. But the bulk of her fortune came from real estate, from that side hustle that became a second career. Her Brentwood home alone represented a massive portion of her net worth, and she just finished the final renovation before her health began to decline in early 2025. Neighbors said she'd walk her dog every day, always in a hat and her signature sunglasses, rain or shine. And then, suddenly, in March, she listed the property for sale. It was a signal, though no one wanted to read it that way. She knew she was running out of time. Beyond the properties and the royalties, there were the intangibles, her archives, her photography collections, the intellectual property of her books and films. And then there were the responsibilities, the staff who maintained her properties, the taxes on multiple estates, the insurance premiums, the monthly burn that comes with wealth of that scale. This wasn't passive income. This was a machine that required constant attention. And as her health faltered as the end drew near, the question became, who could carry the weight? Not just the wealth, the weight. Because every asset came with a story, every property held a memory, and Diane's children, Dexter and Duke, now in their 20s, would inherit not just the money, but the burden of deciding what to do with it. Do they keep the Brentwood estate, the home their mother lovingly restored over 16 years? Do they sell it and honor her work by letting someone else love it the way she did? Do they continue her legacy of preservation, or do they carve out their own path? These aren't easy questions, and the tears her family shed weren't tears of joy or greed. They were tears of overwhelming responsibility, of realizing that their mother had built something so vast and intricate that it would take years to untangle. This is what inheritance really means when someone leaves behind more than just a bank account. It's a legacy that demands something of you, and that demand can feel crushing. On the morning of October 11, 2025, emergency services received a call from Diane's Brentwood home at 8:08 a.m. Paramedics arrived and transported her to a local hospital. She was 79 years old, and though the cause of death has not been officially released, those close to her knew her health had been declining for months. She'd lived in that Brentwood neighborhood for many years, and up until just a few months before her passing, she'd been a familiar sight on the sidewalks, walking her dog, always dressed the same. Hat, sunglasses, a kind of uniform that announced she was still herself, still Diane, still the woman who wore what she wanted and didn't care what you thought. Her death was confirmed by Dory Rath, a producer who'd worked with her on several of her most recent films. The family requested privacy, and tributes began pouring in almost immediately. Bette Midler, her co-star in The First Wives Club, wrote on Instagram, "I cannot tell you how unbearably sad this makes me. She was hilarious, a complete original, and completely without guile, or any of the competitiveness one would have expected from such a star." Kimberly Williams Paisley, who played her daughter in Father of the Bride, said, "Working with Diane Keaton was one of the highlights of my life. You are one of a kind, and it was thrilling to be in your orbit for a time." Even Woody Allen, decades removed from their collaboration, issued a statement praising her talent and her impact on his work. And Francis Ford Coppola, who'd given her Kay Adams all those years ago, said simply, "There will never be another like her." The outpouring was global, a reminder that Diane Keaton hadn't just acted in films. She'd changed how we saw women on screen. She'd made it okay to be awkward, to be uncertain, to be yourself. And that gift, more than any fortune, is what she leaves behind. Why does Diane Keaton matter to us? Because she proved that you don't have to fit the mold to be extraordinary. She was never the ingenue. She was never the bombshell. She was the woman who stammered and second-guessed and wore men's clothes and still became an icon. She taught us that style isn't about following trends. It's about knowing yourself so well that you create your own. She showed us that it's okay to start over in your 50s, to adopt children when everyone says it's too late, to build a second career out of a passion no one expected. She demonstrated that independence doesn't mean loneliness. It means refusing to compromise the things that make you who you are. And she did it all without apology, without explanation, without waiting for permission. Her fortune, that $100 million that makes her family cry, is a monument to all of that. Every restored Spanish colonial is a testament to her belief that beautiful things deserve to be saved. Every film residual is a reminder that her work endures. Every dollar is proof that you can be yourself, fully, unapologetically yourself, and still thrive. The wounds she carried from childhood, that sense of not quite belonging, of having to work twice as hard to be heard, didn't define her. It fueled her. It pushed her to take risks, to say yes when others would have said no, to build something lasting out of the broken pieces. And in the end, isn't that what legacy really is? Not the money, not the awards, but the transformation of pain into beauty, the conversion of loneliness into connection, the proof that you were here, that you mattered, that you changed how the world saw things. Diane Keaton lived a life of relentless creativity and quiet courage. She never married, but she loved deeply. She never followed the rules, but she built a career that spanned 6 decades. She adopted children in her 50s and became a mother when the world told her she'd missed her chance. She turned a passion for architecture into a multi-million-dollar empire. She made us laugh. She made us cry. She made us believe that it was okay to be odd, to be uncertain, to be searching for something we couldn't quite name. And now, as her children navigate the fortune she left behind, the properties and the royalties and the weight of carrying her legacy forward, we're reminded that the greatest inheritance isn't wealth. It's the example of a life lived on one's own terms. It's the permission to be yourself, even when the world insists you should be someone else. It's the courage to start over, to take risks, to build beauty out of ruins. If Diane Keaton's work ever carried you through a hard season, if you ever saw yourself in Annie Hall's awkward charm, or found comfort in her refusal to apologize for who she was, or felt inspired by her late-in-life reinvention, consider leaving a small tribute below. Even a single like is a whisper of gratitude, a way of saying, "You mattered. You changed how I saw the world, and we won't forget." Rest well, Diane. You taught us how to live. And in doing so, you left behind something far more valuable than money. You left behind permission, and that, in the end, is the greatest fortune of all.